it makes me actually realize, you see, with impatience, the need to defeat, this regime. And I don't mince my words when I'm speaking about this regime. I hate it intensely. I hate it. Every time I stand on a platform, I'm reminded of these gruesome atrocities. I'm even reminded of my own children. If they had succeeded, they would have killed. My children were, at that time, one of them was 2 years old, another one 10 years, a baby. And I saw it as basically an inhuman regime, a cruel regime. People who were fighting for a right to oppress the majority of the people of this country. And I disagree with a lot of people who think that de Klerk and others have changed. Because de Klerk and others have done nothing about removing the forces that they created. It's not just Hammer, Van der Vestes, and Gert, Hugo, or whatever his name. It is those people who strategized and worked out the strategies and tactics of destroying us. De Klerk, Rolf Meyer, Adrian Flock, Magnus Malan, Big Potter, who were in the center of the strategy of killing people, in the State Security Council. And therefore, that's why some of us have got reservation about the amnesty they are talking about. Before you consider an amnesty, let us see what they did. When we were coming back, they forced us to fill forms to say, what did we do? And I think that should apply to them as well.
I'm going to put it to you, and you may be offended, but I doubt it. From what you're saying, you are racist and you believe in white superiority, that white people are a superior race. Would you agree with that?
I will not beat around the bush. Okay, I agree because it's proven that white people can run the country. And it's proof that black people, in most, besides the example which I given you of Biafra and things, they generally can't do that. They haven't got capacity, and you hear it more and more from black people themselves. If you call it superiority, doesn't mean that you have to right to oppress them in any way. And I don't take the not having voting rights oppression.
So you didn't think black people should have the right to vote?
They should right to vote in their homelands.
Annika Larsson, having travelled all the way to Krakow for that piece of that interview you saw there, the special report in full will be broadcast here on ENCA tomorrow evening, Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Please make sure that you tune in for that special report from Annika Larsson.
Machine politically incorrect. Chris Hani is one of the most debatable, politically divisive, politically polarizing story of our time. For young people to understand, well, I was 13 when Chris Hani was taken over. I was in high school. And I remember exactly where I was at the softball diamond when we had the story. And even then we knew how, I knew at the time, and the people around us knew what it meant when we received the story of Chris Hani's death. And of course, every time I remember the death, I remember where I was. Much like when those skyscrapers fell and it's important moment in history. And I can imagine for white people it may not be, it could be remembrance, but not as touching as it is for us. Of course, Steve Biko says it's a different epoch of history. So it's very difficult to opine on Chris Hani objectively. Throughout time, it has always been that no matter what happens, even if someone is saying this one killed Chris Hani, our people will still protect that person, even if there's evidence to show that this one, here he is, he's taking out, or he's paying someone to take out Chris Hani. Depending on who you trust, Chris Hani was taken out by his fellow comrades. Which one? For what gains? There have been speculation for a long time. Chris Hani was a commander. Chris Hani was a soldier who had battle time, who had battle experience. It's very divisive, man, to talk about Chris Hani. There are people who are saying Jacob Zuma has been threatening for a long time. So you see, Jacob Zuma is one of those politicians that I keep telling you that even if he does wrong, people will say he did not do any wrong. One of his major criticisms is Jacob Zuma will tell us he's going to spill the beans on something, but he doesn't. And those who support him, of course, will say, hey, winner. So if you could, let me give an example. If you criticize Jacob Zuma, then you are white monopoly capital sponsored voice. Should Jacob Zuma, if he knows who took out Chris Hani, tell us? If he doesn't, why aren't others saying it? I mean, these people can't even write a book and say, take this book out when I'm gone. The interview that you listened to about that white guy, he is saying it, he's out in Europe, he's enjoying himself. All these benefits must tell you something. I mean, the writing is on the wall. A man called Eugene de Kock is one of the worst. I mean, they called him prime evil. The way he was so merciless. It is Jacob Zuma's presidency that allowed that man to be free. They gave him how much? 200,000 for him to go out. And those things have never been challenged, whether it's true, whether it's not, it doesn't matter. But what I'm saying is, and what baffles us, is the fact that we are left here talking about ourselves. Let me give you another example. Annika Larsen goes to overseas to go and interview someone that we allowed to leave South Africa, and he says he doesn't, I mean, he would do it again. That guy was received as a hero, and that guy is a hero to people who you could tell the people who published that thing, they wanted something. They wanted to poke something in us. They wanted to, well, divide us. They've already started. You know, this is the most, that's what I'm telling you, is the most difficult thing as an African to discuss, because yes, we want the truth of what happened to Chris Hani. But even if that man tells you that, no, it's actually Thabo Mbeki. Thabo Mbeki, people will say, nah, it can't be. That guy was given money to say it's Thabo Mbeki because now he's out of the country. You see, it's a very polarizing issue, this thing of Waluś, Clive Derby-Lewis. Zuma having visited them, having spoken to them. Others are saying Zuma even saw these people before Chris Hani was taken out. I spoke about Don't Kill Hani Again. Those t-shirts worn by Panyaza Lesufi and Zizi Kodwa. It's now a campaign in the African National Congress to take to 2027 to say they want to reclaim back the ANC. And now what are they doing? They're using the name of Chris Hani to get us agitated. Now, I've been trying to speak to Sizwe for a long time. I've struggled. I've consumed a lot of content from Sizwe. Sizwe Mapindani Vukulu. This is not the only video he has done about such exposés. Sizwe has in fact, let's stop it and listen to him.
Jacob Zuma and Cyril Ramaphosa are not enemies. They're just political opponents. Because Jacob Zuma, Nelson Mandela, Thabo Mbeki, Matthew Sposa, Tokyo Sehwale, both of them know what happened to Chris Hani's murder. Because the reason why Chris Hani was killed is because he was interfering with the 60 million arms deal contract, $60 million, which is 800 or at that time, 800 million rand. That was being negotiated with the arms trade. So Janusz Waluś was working for the arms trade connection. His employer was a guy called Peter Jackson. And the police docket on Chris' investigation had an instruction that was written in Afrikaans. This instruction says, information about Peter Jackson is not to be followed on. Me and many black people in South Africa stood with Zuma. When Mbeki removed him, we stood with him. But here's the thing. If Zuma is a revolutionary that he presents himself to be, why didn't he follow up about Peter Jackson, not Janusz Waluś? Why didn't he follow up with that? He keeps saying Uzo Kuluma. He's part of the people who were negotiating the arms trade connection. Yeah, now as a good negotiator. And then at some point he was head of intelligence. A position that Chris Hani also occupied at some point in Umkhonto weSizwe, the actual Umkhonto weSizwe. And now, as a president and as a close friend of Chris Hani, why didn't he follow up on information about Peter Jackson? Because all five of these people know what happened to Chris Hani. If he was the revolutionary, he would have actually established the real killer of Chris Hani, unless if he risked being implicated too.
So, who are these characters? Who is Peter Jackson? If these people know who Peter Jackson is, why are they not attending to Peter Jackson? Is it even dangerous to talk about Peter Jackson? Now, Bukulu is in, Comrade Sizwe is in New York, as far as I know. He's in New York. He's a publisher. He's published more than 4 books, thought-provoking. He's, Comrade Sizwe is one of those that when I opened this desk, this space here to speak to people, it's one of those that I had dreams of speaking to. Because he's going to tell us lots of stories that we do not know. And those who know those stories are afraid to speak, but Sizwe speaks. Like I said, I've been struggling for many years to get hold of him. I can't say it's because he lives in the US and I'm here. Some of the times do link up so we could talk, but it's just very difficult. I mean, I'm struggling for people who are living here in Gauteng, here in Pretoria, to speak to. But going back to Waluś Jalus, even if people tell you who is Peter, even if they tell you even if Clive Derby-Lewis, they collaborate, they tell you who's the person who paid them money and for what. Knowing South Africans, they will still deny. So if at the end of the day, the person who's pointed out, it's you are going to say no. During the height of Thabo Mbeki, it was said, "Ke Thabo Mbeki." During the height of Cyril Ramaphosa, they are saying, "Ke Cyril Ramaphosa." When evidence is purported to be implicating Jacob Zuma, people are saying Jacob Zuma. So it means it's many people, whether it's many peoples of the ANC, Mandela included. They say, you know the interview that you heard about Chris Hani, he said himself, Chris Hani, there were deadlocks that he could not compromise on, and people are saying those things. People are saying there were lots of monies that he could not compromise because he was not happy that Armed Struggle was suspended and eventually disbanded. But look, man, I do not know, and this thing is very difficult to tell because we are a divided nation, and I'm telling you, you know, it's always disingenuous, and I give you this example. Let me give you this example. Jacob Zuma will tell you a lot of things that is wrong about certain leaders and say those leaders have done it. Cyril Ramaphosa, for an example, because that's his arch enemy. And Zuma fans will tell you the things that were done during Zuma that were good. And like, let me give you an example. When people say, but it is Zuma who suppressed Fees Must Fall, it is Zuma who released all these people, they say, but it was a collective decision. It wasn't only Zuma. Once you attain state power, you realize that certain information is classified, and it can only be declassified after, whether it's 50 years, whether it's 100 years, and you cannot divulge that. I know in the US, once you become the state president, you are allowed to see, I don't know in South Africa, you are allowed to view and peruse classified information. And classified information is therefore there to protect the integrity of the country, because some things will explode. For example, Mandela had a list of spies. Even if he confirmed that list, because it was given by apartheid people, they gave him. And of course, there are people who say Mandela himself was a big spy, because Mandela was negotiating for many years with whites alone, from Vita Fester's prison, where he was technically incarcerated, but in a house where he would have everything that he wanted, but he was still technically a prisoner, even though he was roaming free in the house. At that time, they were negotiating of paving the way for this South Africa. And we do not have minutes of CODESA. We do not know things that were actually deadlocked. Section 25 of the Constitution, this and that. There are certain reasons why the ANC cannot move at certain deadlocks. The reason that the South African Post Bank was allowed to die, so Take a Lot and other Postnet and other logistics companies can mushroom. All of those things are deliberate for us to blame the ANC, because ANC was defeated. ANC could not fight and win on the battleground, because ANC did not have muscle and did not have allies in Cuba and Russia to say, let's wage a war against Saddam. And we are speaking this at the backdrop of what is happening in in DRC where our soldiers are taken out. But anyway, I don't want to talk about that. Waluś Janusz, what is the intention of interviewing him? Is it to divide us? Or do we want that information? Is it important? Because even if they give us that information, we'll end up fighting amongst ourselves. I actually do believe that people in the ANC have a hand. I actually believe that. But I do not think, because let me tell you, even if they say, okay, next year they are declassifying certain things and evidence is produced, I'm being honest with you. If it points your favorite, I know Malema was too young in '93, and maybe even gives us an opportunity to speak about that. If it points out to Malema with evidence showing Malema, EFF fighters are going to say Amrala Mhlanyela, even if there's evidence against him. And I'm using Julius Malema deliberately because I know he's not implicated. I know Julius Malema was too young. I think I'm 3 or 4 years his senior. So I was 13, so he must have been 9 or something. I think he said he was 9 when he boarded the bus from Seshego Polokwane to go to FNB Stadium to go and bury him. Yeah. So Julius Malema was too young to be implicated. So that's why I want to use him as a reason. So those who support Julius Malema, if the declassified information comes and says this is Julius Malema, they are going to say this was cooked by those who were in government before this thing was, to make sure that their legacy is protected, and they paint this one. So it is not in our interest to listen to Waluś Janusz. But we ought to know the truth. The temptation to know the truth comes with the risk that if they do give us the truth, it will divide us. And it will divide us for long, because people are going to use it. Even those spies who were on the Mandela list or known spies, there were more spies, I believe. There were more spies. You know, a lot of guests who came here, they were telling me that, and telling us, of course, that the apartheid government killed less of their spies because they were fruitful and they could not kill them. For example, people like De Kock and Waluś Janusz could be tokens of threat. That's why they are kept alive. Because this is what comrades are telling us, that these people are kept deliberately in case our freedom fighters try to have change of mind and betray their masters who have enslaved them. Remember, being a spy, you are actually being enslaved. You are captured, tortured, allowed to release information and taken back to the field, and you start working for the enemy. And should you deviate, they've got too much files for you. You do not want to deviate from the mission. So to keep you alive and to make sure that you do not renegade, they've got spies and information against you. Should you do something, they leak such things. Because this, our comrades, they could, and I'm speaking all of this, of course I'm speculating, I do not know. That's why I want comrades like Sizwe to come and talk to us. And of course I'm struggling. Machine politically incorrect. Let me stop it there. It's a very, so I don't know what South Africa should do with Waluś Janusz, Clive Derby-Lewis, Eugene de Kock, all of these people. I do not know. The last time I did a video, I showed you with evidence, court papers, everything about Adrian Basson. Guess what? YouTube, they took it down and suspended me. Believe me, they took it down. And it's not me who's saying it. It wasn't me. It was me just showing you what proof and what evidences were presented in court. But this platform took it down and hit me with a suspension. So I can't talk. I can't tell you what they say. Imagine if I tell you what I feel. But anyway, Martian political incorrect, it's a jungle out there. What is the benefit of African people listening to Waluś Jalous? Are we benefiting anything? Are we going to get information? Because if it comes, we are going to fight amongst ourselves. But who wrote this? Do you believe them? I don't even know what is the meaning of the word Stratcom. And I keep asking comrades, what is Stratcom? What is propaganda? Who led the propaganda? This thing cannot thrive without, proliferation of spies all over the camps, from Upland, Mkhonto Wesizwe, everywhere. And the spy network infiltrated all levels of all political parties and the struggle and their armed forces. All levels, there were spies. But anyway, let me leave it at that. It's a sad one. It's a sad episode. It's, when you say you are cornered, and this is an example of us Africans as a conquered people. It's a sad episode for me, because that's the realization that the people that we think are heroes are actually not heroes, are defeated people who are working for the administration. But we do not have proof who is. If you read a lot of literature of struggle wars, a lot of literature, those people had about 3 names wherever they operated. And there's always a government spy who's releasing information. Some were kept alive, somewhere. But anyway, let me let it at that, because this one is becoming a very emotional one. Let's let it go. Machine political incorrect. Tell me what you feel about Waluś Jalous. For me, I don't know, man. I don't know. Let me leave it at that. Eitada.
Jacob Zuma and Cyril Ramaphosa are not enemies. They're just political opponents. Because Jacob Zuma, Nelson Mandela, Thabo Mbeki, Matthew Sposa, Tokyo Sexwale, both of them know what happened to Chris Hani's murder. Because the reason why Chris Hani was killed is because he was interfering with the 60 million arms deal contract, $60 million, which is 800, or at that time, 800 million rand. That was being negotiated with the arms trade. So Janusz Waluś was working for the arms trade connection. His employer was a guy called Peter Jackson. And the police docket on Chris' investigation had an instruction that was written in Afrikaans. This instruction says, information about Peter Jackson is not to be followed on. Me and many black people in South Africa stood with Zuma. When Mbeki removed him, we stood with him. But here's the thing. If Zuma is a revolutionary that he presents himself to be, why didn't he follow up about Peter Jackson, not Janusz Waluś? Why didn't he follow up with that? He keeps saying Uzo Kuluma. He's part of the people who were negotiating the arms trade connection. Yeah, now as a good negotiator. And then at some point he was head of intelligence. A position that Chris Hani also occupied at some point in Umkhonto Wesizwe, the actual Umkhonto Wesizwe. And now, as a president and as a close friend of Chris Hani, why didn't he follow up on information about Peter Jackson? Because all 5 of these people know what happened to Chris Hani. If he was the revolutionary, he would have actually established the real killer of Chris Hani, unless if he risked being implicated too. Peace and love.
Sunni's killer, Janusz Waluś, is a free man, but has his nearly 30-year imprisonment reformed him? This is one of the questions from former SACP Central Committee member Ronnie Castrals. He says the nation deserves to know if Hani's killer is a changed man. The former chief of staff of the ANC's armed wing, Umkhonto weSizwe, was gunned down outside his Boksburg home in 1993. Now, Hani's former bodyguard has described the outspoken and defiant SACP leader as someone who could have played an instrumental role in South Africa's democracy. ENCA's Ronald Masenda has got those details.
Such a humble character, Comrade Chris. You know, he knew every soldier by name and by combat name, you know. He was friendly. I used to sleep with him in the same bed. When we visited homes in Tanzania, he never went and slept in hotels.
Former bodyguard Phumlani Khubukile says Chris Hani was a marked man who needed protection wherever he went.
I'll be coming at a later flight. When I arrived in East London later, it was called Ben Schoeman Airport that time. When Comrade Chris landed, he spotted Askaris. Askaris are those who are working for us, MK, but defected to work for the enemy, that is the South African regime.
Khubukile had vast military experience, having received a basic commander's course in Angola and East Germany in 1983. He also served in Umkhonto weSizwe before being assigned as Hani's bodyguard shortly after Hani returned from exile. He says at the time of the struggle hero's death, he was no longer guarding him, something he regrets.
Those comrades who were guarding Comrade Chris at the time, you know, those comrades were volunteering. You know, they were there as volunteers. They were not deployed there by the ANC or by MK. They had deployed themselves. For Comrade Chris to say to them, hey, you can take leave on Easter, I can believe that because he was a very humble person and he wanted them to be with their families.
And now the man who gunned him down is out on parole after spending nearly 3 decades behind bars. At the age of 69, many South Africans are curious as to know whether Janusz Waluś regrets what he did.
He could be feted as a hero there and make statements about how right he was in ridding the world of an arch-communist. At least in the prison system, there should be proof of the statements he makes and signs in terms of his convictions, showing, admitting that what he did was absolutely prime evil. And we don't see proof of that at present.
Hani was killed 29 years ago, but he's still considered one of South Africa's greatest freedom fighters. Ronald Masenda, Mthatha.